This is David Bell, wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. You're listening to the Best Bell Fantasy Football Podcast.
And welcome in to episode 37 of the Best Bell Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Bradley Stalder, and tonight I'm going to talk to you about the biggest ADP risers and fallers. But before we do, make sure you check out the FFWC. Use the promo code BESTBELL when you jump into either their Player Profiler Championship, their Super Flex Championship, or they've got some best ball tournaments. Check those out, $25, $50. They've got dynasty leagues that you can buy or start up. So check out FFWC. Use the promo code BESTBELL when you log in. It's great playing on the FFWC. Right now, I'm in the middle of an FFWC draft that I'll share with all of you once the draft is complete. And there's also a video showdown that's going on, organized by my former co-host, Billy Muzio. So make sure you check that out. The FFWC Player Profiler Championship for sure. There's live drafting in Vegas, so check it out. And if you buy a 3-pack, it's $100 off. So check out the FFWC. All right, let's jump into the biggest risers and fallers of June to July. So I went from June 12th to July 11th when this podcast is coming out. And the biggest riser in round one, Stefon Diggs, by 2 spots. Now, Stefon Diggs, this is not a surprise. There's been a lot of love for Stefon Diggs. He's been given his, of course, connection with Josh Allen, but also more of the research that suggests that he's going to retain his wide receiver 1 weeks. He wasn't a wide receiver 1 very often, at least one of those elite wide receiver 1s we saw in 2020 when he first joined the Buffalo Bills. But that type of regression impacts players pretty significantly. On average, players who lose 15% of their wide receiver 1 rates will increase that back about 9% the following year. So there are reasons for optimism with Stefon Diggs. Additionally, the Buffalo Bills have not added any wide receivers to their core at all in free agency, aside from Jamison Crowder, who plays the slot and replaces Cole Beasley. Gabriel Davis we'll talk about him in a little bit on this podcast, but he seems to have the welcome mat in Buffalo. So Stefon Diggs, there's a lot of optimism, but the biggest faller is only 1.7 points in the first round, or ADP spots, and that's Derrick Henry. Now, as I should have mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, these ADPs are drawn from Drafters Fantasy. So they are full PPR, and it makes sense that you're going to fade Henry a little bit in full PPR. Half PPR, he's going to get the rushing touchdowns, and the rushing yards and rushing touchdowns are more valuable to a running back like Derrick Henry in half PPR underdog formats, whereas in Drafters full PPR, Derrick Henry, it makes sense why you might be fading him a little bit more. We aren't going to talk about him on the podcast, but I wouldn't be surprised if Hassan Haskins is also a player that is increased. In fact, let me just check that Hassan Haskins actually decreased about 15 spots as well. So both Henry and Haskins have fallen, and that's because there is a running back who signed with the Tennessee Titans, which we'll talk about later. So I wonder how much that impacts Derrick Henry. Maybe this running back I'll talk about later impacted him more than what we're giving credit for, or maybe the market is giving credit for. In round 2, Saquon Barkley has increased his ADP 4.4 spots. And Saquon, in June, his ADP was 21.8. Now it's 17.4. You're going to have to pay up in the first half of the second round to get Saquon Barkley. But before, in June, it was back in the second round. Remember, in April and May, you were able to get Saquon Barkley in the third round. Boy, oh boy. And in speaking with 2 guests, Derek Brown of Fantasy Pros and Dr. Edwin Porras of Fantasy Points, both of them pointed out that Saquon Barkley is poised for an enormous year. So I've been drafting a lot more of Barkley and been pretty aggressive in my Drafters Fantasy mini tournaments entries to get more Saquon Barkley exposure. The biggest fallers, there were 2 of them In round 2, Joe Mixon and Mark Andrews. Mixon and Andrews, I think both maybe overpriced, overvalued, but Mixon, his fall is tied to one of his running back teammates rises, and we'll talk about his teammate rising in a little bit in round 17. Mark Andrews, I think there's a little bit of love for Rashad Bateman, who we'll talk about in a bit. But if Mark Andrews goes down, it's Rashad Bateman who's going to go up. There's not going to be, you're going to have a little bit of James Proche, Devin Duvernay bump up. But Mark Andrews is not a strong fade. As you can tell, the fades for the first 2 rounds or the fallers, not very much. There's not been a lot of movement aside from Saquon Barkley in the first 2 rounds since June. Now, round 3 is where we start to see the most movement. In fact, the most rising of any player in the first 3 rounds is Travis Etienne. 9.3 spots. Gone are the days of 5th round, almost 6th round Travis Etienne when I was getting him in February in my big board drafts. No, Travis Etienne is now in a full PPR setting. Etienne is going at 32.6. He's going in the back end of the 3rd round, and he's jumped 9.3 spots. I would not be surprised if Travis Etienne starts fluttering into the middle of the 2nd round by the time we get to August and September. Biggest faller in round 3, Alvin Kamara, 10.2 spots. Now remember, Alvin Kamara was being drafted at 20.8, and now he's getting drafted at the 31. He's gone almost an entire round, and that's with rumblings of a possible suspension. There is no movement in the case. If you listen to Drew Davenport, the FF lawyer, fantasy football go-to guy, he said that there's been no movement on this case, and there's not reason to be fading Alvin Kamara. So this might be the time to bite. If you see Kamara in the 4th round, that's when you need to draft him. In fact, in my Scott Fishbowl mock draft today, I took Alvin Kamara in the 5th round. In the 5th round. Yes. So I would recommend buying the dip on Alvin Kamara. Round 4, Gabriel Davis. Gabriel Davis has jumped 7.5 spots. Back in June, he was being drafted in the 5th round, 52.3. Now, 44.8. I've seen him go as early as 36 in some drafts in the 3rd round. So the Gabriel Davis love is trending up and up and up. And I've spoken ad nauseum about Gabriel Davis, but let me just hash it out. The projections are not in his favor. It looks like it's going to be difficult to get him above a 14% target share. However, there are other reasons to like Gabriel Davis. His yards per route run is really high. He has a high touchdown rate, and we've seen him burn defenses in high leverage situations, like in the playoff game against the Kansas City Chiefs. So Gabriel Davis, there is reasons for optimism, but he's trending and he's getting to be so expensive. Bygone are the days, though, where you're going to get 5th round Gabriel Davis, except if you're in the Scott Fishbowl, where I was able to get Gabriel Davis at 108th overall in a mock draft I did today. And that's like where I would love to get him. I'd love to get Gabriel Davis in the triple digits, but realistically, in these money leagues, Gabriel Davis, if to the non-casual player, he's been skyrocketing. So keep your eyes out for Gabriel Davis. He's more of a best ball play, in my opinion, but this is a best ball tournament. So check out Gabriel Davis. He is on the rise, though he might have priced himself out. The biggest faller in round 4, David Montgomery, by nearly 11 spots. David Montgomery was a clear-cut back-end 3rd round pick. Now he's almost a back-end 4th round pick. He was going 34.7. Now he's going 45.5. And there's not been much that's changed with David Montgomery. You don't hear about another running back. They did sign Darrington Evans and they drafted Treston Ebner, but David Montgomery is the incumbent. Khalil Herbert was useful behind him, but there's no reason for the Chicago Bears to hold back from using David Montgomery unless he's hurt. And maybe it's a new coaching staff. Maybe there's a new coaching scheme. David Montgomery just doesn't fit that, but it's possible. It's possible. But maybe the market is just reacting to, we want those wide receivers, and the bumping down of David Montgomery is a result of that. The biggest riser in round 5, Rashad Bateman. He's jumped 6.7 spots from June, and Bateman was going at the 60.6. So outside, he was beginning the 6th round. Now he's middle of the 5th round. And that's with the Ravens not having signed anyone. As it becomes more clear that Rashad Bateman is going to be the number 1, and there's not going to be a Will Fuller type or a Julio Jones type or another pseudo alpha, even where there would be a question of whether Rashad Bateman would be able to compete well with targets. Rashad Bateman seems to be the clear-cut wide receiver 1 projected in this Baltimore Ravens offense. On the flip side, however, in round 5, one of the biggest fallers is his teammate J.K. Dobbins. We have not received positive reports about Dobbins. The last we've heard is he's just catching balls out of the jugs machine and not running routes. He's not doing drills. He's just catching balls. And that's concerning. And when talking with Dr. Edwin Porras about this, he said that this is a red flag, ultimately, that you'd expect Dobbins to be doing more than this by this time of the offseason. So I think that he's going to be a running back that you'll see continue to decline. Round 6, Russell Gage. My boy, Russell Gage has jumped 21.7, and that's nearly 2 rounds in the last month. The most obvious reason, Rob Gronkowski's retirement. We'll talk about Gronk in a little bit, but the biggest jump so far of any player in the first 6 rounds is Russell Gage, 21.7 spots. The biggest faller, however, Amari Cooper in round 6. He's dropped from, let's see here. He was at 44.2, back end of the 4th round, and now 63.9, beginning of the 6th round. Amari Cooper dropping 19.7 spots. We have not gotten word about the Deshaun Watson situation. They have finished this preliminary hearing, but no punishment has been put out. I'm wondering whether it's going to be serious or not. There's been some chatter about the NFL not interviewing certain people or interviewing certain people connected to the case. I'm avoiding Amari Cooper until I get clarity. Maybe I'll take a couple shares here or there if he drops significantly below the ADP. But I've seen Amari Cooper go in the 70s in some drafts, and I'm okay taking him there. But at Amari Cooper at 44, he was one of my biggest fades from a month and a half ago. So I'm glad that I was able to avoid Amari Cooper for most of that time where he was going down. Round 7, Trey Lance has increased 13 spots. Trey Lance was going at 95.9. Now Trey Lance is going at 82.8. And there weren't that many risers or fallers in that space. But in round 7, this is where you're getting the DeAndre Hopkins, the Allen Lazards, the Damian Harris's, the Devin Singletaries. You're just not sure if you can trust some of these players at these spots. There are serious questions, but now Trey Lance is rising up in that tier where you can more confidently draft him, given that Jimmy Garoppolo, he may not be traded yet, but the 49ers have shut Jimmy Garoppolo out of the meeting rooms. He is not being considered as the quarterback one, Lance is getting all of the work. And I know that there was some rumor about a weak arm or a tired arm, but I'm not worried about Trey Lance and a tired arm. Stop it. Silliness. Anyways, so the biggest riser in round 7, Trey Lance. Biggest faller, Michael Thomas. We still haven't seen Michael Thomas in full pads practice. We saw him in one video for about 30 seconds running some routes without pads on a turf field, it looked like, in the middle of nowhere, no teammates, just videos of him running. Fine. Michael Thomas, still not a vote of confidence. He's dropped a full round in the last month. Round 8, Kadarius Toney has jumped 12.6 spots. And I think the reason for optimism is pretty clear. Kadarius Toney is a good player on an offense we think that will be better, and he is healthy. So a former first round pick with the shenanigans behind him, I think this is more of a recovery bump than a Kadarius Toney got good news. But there are reasons for optimism for Kadarius Toney, and he has a lot of underlying metrics which support his possible breakout in 2022. Treylon Burks has dropped 19.9 spots in round 8, and there are reasons for concern with Burks because he hasn't looked good on any of the video we've seen of him. The concerns are that he's going to bust, frankly, for the Tennessee Titans. Ryan Tannehill on a less efficient offense, a run-first offense. Will Robert Woods be back week 1? That might stunt Treylon Burks. Kyle Phillips, if you remember my May to June video, Treylon Burks was not the biggest riser. In fact, it was Kyle Phillips among all the Tennessee Titans. There are concerns about Treylon Burks. If anything, though, this is like the discount buy right now. It's almost 2 rounds that he's dropped in the last month. I think you can start getting shares of Treylon Burks. Round 9, as I mentioned, Treylon Burks going down. Robert Woods was the biggest riser in round 9, but only about 5 spots. There's still concern of whether Robert Woods will be ready for week 1, but with videos of him actually practicing as opposed to the Michael Thomas videos of him just running routes by himself, Robert Woods was out with his team, practicing, doing the stretches, doing some drills, and he bumped up about 5 spots in round 9. One of the biggest fallers in round 9, Kenneth Walker, or now should I say Ken Walker. He was being drafted at 90.6, now 105.4. There's more love for Rashad Penny, and with negative news about Chris Carson, it's probably going to be Ken Walker and Rashad Penny. But in a full PPR with limited exposure to the passing game, and with the Seattle Seahawks notorious for not passing the ball to their running backs over the last couple of years, Kenneth Walker, who doesn't have that profile, that makes sense that he's starting to get faded more in round 9. Round 10, the biggest riser, Ramondre Stevenson. And there's been a lot of chatter among the talking heads about Stevenson being a breakout player. And he had one of the top juke rates in the NFL among all running backs last season. Breakaway runs. He had a lot of ancillary statistics to support him being an explosive player. But at round 10, there's not like much movement. A couple people are reaching on Stevenson, probably for the pass catching, and with news that James White is probably not going to be ready for the start of the season, makes sense that Ramondre Stevenson's bumping up. Sky Moore has dropped 8.7 all the way down to 110.4. And I found myself this past week just clicking draft Sky Moore at 110. I was drafting Sky Moore in the 70s and 80s way back a couple months ago. And now Sky Moore has dropped even more due to the hamstring injury, or strain, I should say. This is a buy low candidate for me. He's competing against Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who's only going to command, 12 to 14% of the target share. Juju Smith-Schuster might get 20%. Kelsey's going to get 25%. So 40, 55 plus. Yeah, Sky Moore. And I think Sky Moore, there's room for him in this offense, especially to beat out Mecole Hardman. So at 8.7 drop, this is the time to buy Sky Moore in all of your best ball leagues. Sky Moore in round 10. Absolutely. Yeah, buy the dip. He's connected to Patrick Mahomes, second round pick, early declared junior who really only played 2 years. And you need to be getting a lot of Sky Moore at this spot. Round 11, Tim Patrick was the biggest riser, 13.5 spots, a full round. I don't think there's really any connection with any of the other players. It's just that there's, I think, been more optimism about reaching for Tim Patrick, because looking at the rest of the wide receivers in that round or the following rounds, like Tim Patrick, right after that is Mecole Hardman and Jahan Dotson, DJ Chark, Josh Palmer. Like those are some of the wide receivers going after Tim Patrick. So I could see why you want to make sure that you're getting your wide receiver. Or if you're not getting wide receiver, you're going to get a running back in that spot. And there are a lot of running backs in that area that I like to get. So if you're not going to go with one of the running backs like Isaiah Spiller or Darrell Henderson or Kenneth Gain in those spots, you should be considering Tim Patrick. But one of the players who's fallen a lot, and rightly so, is Michael Carter. Fun fact, Michael Carter had 0 targets on third down last season for the New York Jets because Ty Johnson had the third down role. Why are we thinking that Michael Carter is just immediately going to step into a third down running back role and Breece Hall is going to be a first and second down? That's difficult to do when you trade a 4th round pick and your 2nd round pick to make sure you get Breece Hall. No, Michael Carter, 4th round draft capital. You're trading him and a 2nd round to move up to get Breece Hall. Breece Hall is going to get all of 1st, all of 2nd, and a lot of the 3rd downs. He's going to be a 3-down workhorse, and getting Breece Hall in the 4th round of your fantasy drafts, sometimes the 5th round of your fantasy drafts, sign me up. I love getting the Breece Hall, Travis Etienne pieces together. It's one of my favorite. All right. Enough of that. In the 12th round, the biggest riser, Joshua Palmer. I think there's just been more love for Palmer as of late to make sure you get parts of the Chargers offense. I don't think there's been really any reports about Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. So Josh Palmer jumping 2 rounds, though, I think is Sharps wanting to get in on that Chargers offense more than how good Josh Palmer is. Dameon Pierce has dropped 7 spots, and that's because of, I think, the pushback from last month when Dameon Pierce was one of the bigger risers, if I recall. Pierce, in 13 games at Florida in his senior year, only 2 of those 13 were double-digit carry games. He's not going to be the guy. And with Marlon Mack signing with the Texans, it's going to be the Marlon Mack show unless something happens. And even if something happens to Marlon Mack, I don't know if Dameon Pierce is going to be a 15 carry per game type of running back. So it makes sense that he's fallen there. Round 13, biggest riser, Van Jefferson. Biggest faller, though, Jameson Williams, because we got clarity that Jameson Williams will probably not start the season for the Detroit Lions. Wheels are up for Amon-Ra St. Brown. You heard it here. Draft Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jameson Williams probably not going to start the season with the Lions. Round 14, a full round jump for Tyrion Davis-Price. Round 14, and what you'll notice actually, round 14 onward, there are 4 players on the same team, round 14 and later, who dropped the most of their rounds. David Njoku, round 14, dropped 19.6 spots. David Bell dropped 26 spots. Friend of the podcast, David Bell, dropped 26 spots. And Deshaun Watson dropped 72 spots, and Donovan Peoples-Jones dropped 23.9 spots. All of those Cleveland Browns, all of those values now. It's very easy to see how Njoku, Bell, and Donovan Peoples-Jones can pay off if Jacoby Brissett is still the quarterback. I'm going to do Cleveland Browns projections. That's probably going to be one of the next few team projections reviews that I do. So keep an eye out for those. But David Njoku, David Bell, and Donovan Peoples-Jones are all values going that late. Like David Njoku is probably your tight end 2 or tight end 3, and he has spike week potential. David Bell could be the wide receiver 2 on this Browns team behind Amari Cooper. Donovan Peoples-Jones could be the wide receiver 2. One of those players is probably going to be the wide receiver. It's probably not going to be Anthony Schwartz. So it's going to be David Bell or Donovan Peoples-Jones, and you're going to get a value at round 15 or later from those Browns players. One of the biggest risers is Cameron Brate because of the Gronk retirement. So Cameron Brate, round 16, jumped 42.8 spots. He's one that I'm avoiding. I've gotten almost 0 Cameron Brate in round 16. Back when there was uncertainty about whether Gronk was retiring, I was taking some round 19, round 20 Cameron Brate. But in round 15, to go back just a little bit, Jerick McKinnon signed with the Kansas City Chiefs, so he jumps five rounds to round 15, 61.4 spots. And Jerick McKinnon, I'm still not taking a lot of him at round 15. I preferred him as one of my round 19, 20 players. Okay, I've hit on round 14, 15, and 16, except the round 16 biggest faller was Raheem Mostert. If you remember from May to June, he was also a big faller because of the signing of Sony Michel, and I think that continues, is Raheem Mostert's drop of 17.8 ADP spots. I mentioned at the beginning, the biggest round 2 faller was Joe Mixon. The biggest round 17 riser is Chris Evans by 21.8 spots. There's been a lot of positive vibes about Chris Evans, and he's one of the best. He was the best graded PFF pass catcher on the Cincinnati Bengals last season. Better than Jamar Chase, better than T. Higgins, better than Tyler Boyd. Chris Evans was the best PFF graded receiving offensive player. So getting Chris Evans, and he was the best pass blocker as well. Joe Mixon and Samaje Perine were in like the 20s, 30s of PFF grade. Chris Evans was in the 80s. Evans is probably going to play third down this season, and he's probably going to get some of the pass catching from Joe Mixon. So in half PPR, I'm still pretty confident in Joe Mixon holding his own, but in full PPR, Chris Evans needs to be one of those players that you're taking round 17, round 18, and just cycling through, because he could have a couple spike weeks or have a couple touchdowns that make it into your starting lineup, especially if you go a 0 RB approach. Chris Evans is an interesting eyebrow raise. Round 18, Baker Mayfield rises 23.7 ADP spots, and that's with the Carolina Panthers trade. It makes sense. You're going to see Baker jump about 2 rounds. He was being a last round consideration, round 20. Now he's round 18, and I think he's going to continue to rise a little bit as this Carolina Panthers trade, the market adjusts to the trade. So 2 rounds there, and I think it's going to be more. Check out episode 36 of the Best Bell Fantasy Football Podcast, where I talk about the Carolina Panthers projections with Baker Mayfield. I've talked about Donovan Peoples-Jones, but Peoples-Jones is one of those players that I love smashing in round 18, 19, 20. I was able to get round 19 Donovan Peoples-Jones in a lot of drafts. Somebody stopped me from drafting Donovan Peoples-Jones that late. He's got an average depth of target that's really high. His touchdown rate is about the same as Amari Cooper, and he had a 17% median target share last season. So I want in on Donovan Peoples-Jones. If he's going to be the deep threat, even if he struggles with his hands, Jacoby Meyer's going to hit him here and there. And round 18, you just want 1 or 2 spike weeks. He's shown a few of those games where he's come down with big plays. He's like cheap Marquez Valdes-Scantling, cheap DJ Chark. And why would you pay 11th round Marquez Valdes-Scantling when you could pay 18th round Donovan Peoples-Jones? And they're going to be close enough. Round 19, Mitchell Trubisky is the biggest riser, probably as we haven't heard news of Kenny Pickett really pushing Mitchell Trubisky. We'll get more clarity, but for right now, Mitchell Trubisky is now not going undrafted, but he's going in the 19th round. Rob Gronkowski has fallen 102.8 spots. And we talk about a Gronk spike. Yeah, Gronk spiked all the way down to the 19th round. And I think that's the right spot for Gronk. You're going to still take some Gronk with the chance that he unretires again and joins Brady in the middle of the season. It makes sense for Gronk. He doesn't want to do all this offseason stuff. He knows what he's doing. He's been doing it for years. He doesn't even watch film anymore. He just asks Brady, where do you want me to be? And he's there because he's got the dog in him. So taking round 19, round 20, Rob Gronkowski, I'm totally fine with that. Because what else are you going to be taking? Mitchell Trubisky at these spots? Yeah, sprinkling a little Gronk. Round 20, biggest riser, Dontrell Hilliard, now going from completely undrafted to a round 20 consideration and part of your rotation through. We saw Hilliard have some explosive plays. He was able to get double-digit carries with Derrick Henry out. I don't think that Hilliard eats into too much of Derrick Henry's snaps, but there it is. And the last biggest faller, round 20, Kyren Williams drops to 17.4 from round 19 to pretty much undrafted now. Kyren Williams broke his foot, and he's not been getting a lot of practice. It's going to be Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson, maybe some Jake Funk. Who knows? All right. So to sum it all up, those are our biggest risers and fallers per round. And then I'm going to just identify a few of the biggest risers and fallers overall. So the biggest risers in the last month, Jerick McKinnon, 61 spots. Cameron Brate, 42.8 spots. Paris Campbell, 29.3. Joshua Palmer, 26.5. Irv Smith, 25.4. Mitchell Trubisky, 24.6. And those are the only players who jumped at least 2 rounds. Now, the biggest fallers, Rob Gronkowski because of the retirement, Deshaun Watson because of the speculation regarding possible suspension, David Bell, Odell Beckham because of the ACL. He hasn't signed with anyone yet. Donovan Peoples-Jones, Will Fuller because he hasn't signed with anyone yet. Treylon Burks, Amari Cooper, David Njoku. So pretty much all the Browns have just... This is where you want to start drafting your Browns. Consider that. Because we're going to get clarity here soon. The NFL doesn't want to go into August and September with this case looming. They want to get some punishment or of the appeals out of the way so they can get clarity for the season. So there we go. All right. So those are some of the biggest risers and fallers from June to July. If you like the content, make sure that you give 5 stars on the Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and click the red subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. I really appreciate all of your support. Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you're doing so. And I'm going to keep pumping out content as long as Baby Stalder has not yet arrived. If there's a will, there's a way. I'm going to keep bringing it out for you. But this is my monthly ADP Biggest Risers and Fallers podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. In the meantime, good luck in the best ball streets.